Well, I've got my mask on, and I don't know why, but social distancing doesn't seem to be an issue. Hi, James Gurney here. Just heading out to do a painting, and I think there's some nice waterfalls up ahead. Well, I'm at the base of the Catskill Mountains. There's a lot of old German resorts here that are still operating, and one of these has a beautiful waterfall set that goes up from behind the golf driving range. I've set up next to some interesting rapids in order to paint them just using a very unusual palette of colors. I've got dioxazine purple, white, yellow ochre, pearl red, and hooker's green. Before I left today, I primed my watercolor paper with Casein in a kind of golden hot spot surrounded by blue. Okay, what I like about this subject is that central patch of white. The foam in the center takes all the energy of that rapids, and it's surrounded by the gray of the rock and the dark greenish brown of the water around the foam. And I want to start just drawing it in with a brush. And what'll get interesting is to see how that hot spot of color in the middle ends up influencing some of the colors that I put over it. Now that underpainting in Casein is in a paint that won't re-dissolve if it gets wet. Even if I put in these strokes wet, they won't re-dissolve that blue or the golden color. The paint I'm using is gouache, or opaque watercolor, but I'm not using it with white, so it's still mainly transparent. My son's husky mix, named Smooth, is familiar with white water. He's been on raft trips. If it was a warmer day, he'd probably jump in and go swimming. Now in this rapids feature, there's a constriction and a drop in gradient, which leads to increasing velocity of water. That creates more turbulence. There's an eddy on the side, and then a ring-like pattern of foam as it goes down the main channel. Now I got to capture all this with paint. I'll stay as long as I can with the transparent colors of the framing area of darks, but at some point I have to start using white. To suggest the foam, I tried dry brushing the edge of the brush over the slightly darker grayed down color. The place where the foam becomes most interesting is at the edges of the foamy area where it meets the darker water. Sometimes I paint the dark water over the foam, and sometimes the foam over the dark water. The sun had slipped behind a cloud, leaving everything in kind of a gray shadow. So I have to remember what the light effect was that I liked when I first arrived. That rock that's in the middle, half of it was in shadow and half was in light. When I started out, you may have noticed I didn't use blue. I used violet and green, thinking I could mix the two together to get a blue. But I kind of need a blue right now. Everything is looking too purpley. So I choose anthraquinone blue, nice dark rich blue, to add to the other colors. In the upper left of my composition, there's a group of bubbles that are stirred up by some turbulence and then flow quickly over that waterfall. And I want to use the texture of the paper and a fairly dry brush loaded with white paint to set up some random patterns of foam. When the sun comes out, that area also gets hot reflections from the sun. Sometimes I mix a little bit of blue into the foam because the foam isn't really that bright white. When there's foam on top of foam in the center of that mass in the middle, it gets pretty white, but Other areas are just small bubbles, really, below the surface and above the surface, and they're not necessarily a hot white. And then I try to capture the splashes of foam that come up from the extremely turbulent water. To get a feeling of randomness to these flying foam bubbles, I just let the loaded brush bounce on the surface. Without the aid of photography, our vision is limited in time. In other words, the fast-moving water is just a blur. But if you freeze it with a fast shutter speed, you can see all the individual droplets hanging in the air. So which kind of reality, which concept of time am I hoping to capture with this painting? The fast shutter speed or the slow blur? Well, I'm trying to capture my own perception of it. And in a way, that's what painting is all about, is capturing nature as seen through the filter of our own consciousness. Now, photography is really useful for helping us to understand what we're looking at. But when you come right down to it, it's just a matter of comparing what you see with your eyes to what you try to convey with paint. I gotta come back in with that brown, by the way, because when the sun came back out again, I could see it totally changed the color of that stream bottom. In the end, no matter how hard I try to lock in these effects, the changing light and the dancing water stay just a little outside my reach. Okay, thanks for watching. You might want to check out my website or subscribe to my channel. And then here's a playlist with more good stuff and a video that continues the story. So check them out and share with your friends.